on new data showing the company's antibody drug for COVID can actually prevent the disease in housemates of people who have COVID-19. Len, thanks for being with us this morning. We understand you're taking these data to the FDA to try to expand the indication for this drug under EUA. Tell us how a prevention drug like this might help at this stage in the pandemic.
Right. So thanks, Meg, for having us on. We should take a step back before we dive too deeply into the data and just remember that we've got a war going on, literally. We're trying to win this war through vaccination, and that's probably our strongest weapon. But unfortunately, this war is far from over. There's 70,000 Americans every day who are still getting sick with the virus. And we need to have other weapons besides the vaccine to be able to deal with this pandemic. And our cocktail, RegenCov, really has shown some striking data. A while back, we've shown that you can actually, if you have the disease, if you have COVID and you're an outpatient and you're at risk, we can decrease the number of people who get hospitalized or die by 70% by treating these appropriate patients early. Today's data, we've now taken that step even one step further, and we can treat people before they're infected, and we can show you can block 80% of infections in people who are at risk to be infected with the virus.
You know, one way a lot of folks have talked about these drugs potentially being used is almost like a ring vaccination, because these antibodies provide immediate protection. Whereas if you're surging vaccines to a place like Michigan, for example, it takes maybe a week or 2 weeks for that protection to kick in, or even longer if it's a 2-dose vaccine. Do you anticipate that these drugs could be used in that way? You could surge supply of them to places seeing outbreaks and try to protect people preventively.
Meg, it's an absolutely great question, and I think it's exactly one of the future uses. As you mentioned, the advantage of this cocktail is that it immediately, almost within the first few days, you'll start to get protection from becoming infected. So you could, in a ring, if you will, take all the contacts of somebody who's infected. And very importantly, this cocktail is active against all the worrisome variants that are circulating now. So if you want to put a stop to these variants, you could use this cocktail in a ring vaccination kind of approach. You know, I think the pieces of the puzzle are starting to come together. There's vaccine hesitancy. There's also been some drug hesitancy. But now, if you think about it, we've got the NIH has strongly endorsed last week the RegenCov cocktail. The FDA has authorized it for appropriate outpatients. There is ample supply. The drug is free to patients. And most importantly, there's overwhelming data. So this puzzle, which was a little bit hard to see, is pretty clear to us right now. And I think it should be clear to most people that there is an approach in addition, not instead of, but in addition to vaccination, where we can treat people who are at risk to get the disease. That has to be authorized by the FDA. But actually, right now, we can treat people who are getting the disease every day and keep them out of the hospital.
So one of the things that's been a bit challenging about the drugs so far is they're authorized to be given via IV infusion. But I understand for the prevention trial, you did this via subcutaneous shot. But it sounded like people had to get 4 shots. How will that work in terms of administering this drug?
Right. It turns out you're right. This was just a simple shot under the skin in 4 places, 1 in each arm, maybe 1 in each leg or 1 on each side of your belly. The patients tolerated very well. And it's just once. You get that and it can be done easily. And so subcutaneous now is a possibility in this prevention setting or even in the early treatment setting. We actually have 3 different studies now, which we've completed for subcutaneous use. One is outpatients just looking at the virology. And we saw the subcutaneous administration in terms of just killing the virus was as good as intravenous. And we also have these 2 studies we reported today, very early treatment and prevention, where subcutaneous work very well. And we're doing a study as we speak now, looking at people who are infected further along with subcutaneous administration to see how that stacks up. But I think that these details can be worked out. There are concrete steps that we now know work. The Biden administration has been great with some of their pop-up clinics where people in vulnerable areas can get access to treatment. We have to overcome this drug hesitancy, just like we overcame vaccine hesitancy or overcoming it. And we have to get this drug to people, to appropriate people, and treat them and keep them out of the hospital or dying. It's really, it's a medical, it's a moral imperative. We have to do it. We all have to work together. The time for equivocation, I think, is past. The pieces of the puzzle are all in place. We all have to work. The system, the government, the private industry, the healthcare systems, patients, their doctors, we have to make this work.
I understand you're looking at the drugs in kids under the age of 12. That's a population for whom we may not have vaccines, at least maybe until early 2022, depending on how the studies go for the vaccine makers. Do you anticipate that this could be a treatment option for kids potentially?
Yeah, you always have to study children, but we have monoclonal antibodies as a class are very safe drugs. And some of our other monoclonal antibodies, for example, Dupixent in allergic diseases, we've studied children, very young children, and they seem to behave very similarly to adults. But they're, as I said, they have to be studied in children, but monoclonal antibodies do appear quite safe.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.